Welcome to Triple Sigma episode 8. Joining me is a very special guest, Yush Sztalkoper. Yush is a friend of mine from my early days in Hong Kong. Like many of you, and myself included, we all think very differently. A lot of us joke on Twitter, on X, about being autistic. Some of us have received a diagnosis or a mild diagnosis. And a lot of our journey through this world has been a battle to try to fit in, but then also to try to see how we can leverage our strengths and carve our niche out and create advantages that some say are unfair that enable us to compete in this increasingly competitive world. And so Yush is actually an expert in the neurodiversity or neurodivergent field. And I thought that she would provide a tremendous amount of value to you, the listening audience and viewing audience. So Yush, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex. I like you mentioned, we are old friends from back in our Hong Kong days, and I think this is the first time we've had a proper conversation in like 10 plus years. So it's great to be back, reconnected. And I think this is actually a testament to kind of the work that I'm doing. I want to bring us all together. And our differences is actually what I think unites us. And so being neurodivergent is to me a positive, an advantage, right? All these the work that I do, I coach parents who have neurodivergent children, as well as work with organizations that care about neuroinclusion, culture, and workplaces. And the reality is, I've been navigating this journey for about 4 years because we discovered our son was neurodivergent. And when you see everything through the lens of parenting a child, you see that they were born this way, right? And a lot of what I uncover in this process is instead of focusing on my son's deficits, and the challenges that he had to overcome, I started focusing on what he was naturally really good at. And he's gifted. So there was very crystal clear all the amazing abilities that he had. But there were a lot of challenges that sometimes overshadowed everything. And so instead of choosing to focus in on fixing him, started focusing on what is he really amazing at? Oh my gosh, he can hyper focus. Oh wow, he could teach himself the periodic table elements at the age of 7, just these things. And you start to look very differently at how the brain is wired. And it isn't just about this is who he is and this is what his interests are. It actually comes down to neurologically, this is how he's wired. His brain thinks differently, he feels differently, he engages with the world differently. And that's what makes him so unique and so special. And so my child has taught me all these things, which has just been so eye-opening because about a year ago, I was diagnosed with ADHD and now everything makes sense. I'm like, wow, that's why I do the things that I do. That's why I think the way I do. And that's why I engage with the world the way I do. And that's also why some of the challenges that I've faced throughout my life exist because I am different. I am wired differently. Let's be honest, the world is built for neurotypical brains. And so we're constantly trying to, like you said, find our niche and fit in. And figuring out what that looks like because the burden, unfortunately, is on us. And so I love what you've done because you've figured out how you excel and you figured out how to help other people do the same. And so that's kind of my approach too. I figured out how to excel in this environment as a parent who was, full-time working in corporate job, like parenting a neurodivergent child is just next level. And I realized that I didn't have the tools or the skills. But the more I started to understand and see my son's journey through for myself and started to reflect and had a lot more self-awareness to how, oh my gosh, that's actually how my brain works, and it was amazing just kind of having my child. I'm so lucky that I have a child who essentially helped me discover all these things about myself. And I don't think people nowadays need to have children to see that. There's a lot more research and studies and science out there showing us that, hey, here's how your brain works. And if you notice certain traits about yourself or characteristics, you should think about those things and start to connect the dots because let's be honest, neurodivergent brains are really good at connecting the dots. And so start to see the patterns, right? You're like, I noticed I do this. I noticed I do this. Why is that? And I think curiosity is what's going to get us to the next phase of understanding and empathy and acceptance. Because when you become curious, you don't just assume and you are not, just basing everything off of biases and what these sort of preconceived like beliefs or notions or values, whatever it is, you're like, oh, it's always been like this. And I think that's one of the most harmful ways to think. And I also think another superpower of neurodivergent individuals is we tend to think outside the box. So we'd like to push boundaries. We'd like to question status quo. And oftentimes that gets us labels like being weird or being different or being aggressive or being, all these like more kind of negative connotations around like thinking differently. And
Mhm.
so, and this is why after everything I've learned in the past 4 years, and a testament also to my ADHD brain, I don't think I could have acquired the amount of knowledge and understanding and pattern recognition and dot connecting without my ADHD brain. I mean,
Yeah, so let's talk about that because I would imagine your experience over the last 4 years shed light on experiences that you had growing up in school. And so, if I were to guess, and I'd love to hear more from you, your teachers probably said Yush is incredibly intelligent when she applies herself, but maybe at a young age, it was hard to get you to apply yourself to things that you didn't necessarily care about. Was that true? How would you have raised yourself differently, knowing what you know now about ADHD? And how would you, if you were able to change schooling for children who had essentially impediments that could be turned into superpowers, what would you do?
yeah, oh my gosh, you've touched on sort of my life mission is to change the system, right? Because I look back now because I'm constantly advocating for my child. He's twice exceptional, so he's clearly gifted and he's very advanced in his academics, but he struggles on the social emotional side, right? He has meltdowns, he gets frustrated easily, he has a perfection mentality where if he doesn't know something the second he does it, he gets frustrated. And so there are a lot of these things are innately within him. It's how his brain's wired. It's not because he's, like has crazy somebody that we set those expectations for him. Literally, because I've been raising him, I'm like, we didn't teach him to be this way. He literally was born this way. And so that helps kind of connect the dots because a lot of people, as you become grown-ups and you're neurodivergent and you discover that you are, you're like, is it nature or nurture? And I think that's a really hard question to answer because you don't know. There's so many factors that go into raising a child. And so that kind of gave me a perspective that was really helpful in my own reflections. So to answer your question, going back to school, I remember in my early days when I was really young, and this is kind of the prime, neurodevelopmental age for a child around before they're 8. Around the same age as my child, now that I'm experiencing his perspective, I remember I was a troublemaker at this age. I got in trouble all the time at school. My parents were just like, "Why are you such a troublemaker?" I was disruptive. I was also always doing like things to make other people laugh, and I was like kind of a clown, and I just kind of, was seen as kind of the black sheep, if you will. Like, this person can't follow rules. She doesn't care about authority. She just does whatever she wants. And but I was bright, right? So I was excelling and doing the schoolwork. I just like to goof off. And I think now that I parent my child, I realize that's because I was bored. And when you are highly intelligent and you go into an academic setting that isn't sort of fulfilling your intellectual needs, what happens is you become bored. And when you're bored, especially with an ADHD brain, you start to entertain yourself, right? You come up with ways to, stimulate and do things. And what better way than to engage and get the attention of your classmates and to get the attention of your teacher and to do, so
Hmm.
that there's a lot of parallels I'm seeing in my son because that's what happens to him. A lot of his sort of quote unquote behavioral challenges were when he was bored. And it's like he finished his work before everybody else because he's advanced. And so that was kind of a connection that I made to my childhood. And then as I got older, I thought a lot about how this shaped the person that I became, which now has completely changed because now that I realize I'm neurodivergent, I think very differently about myself. In high school and college and all of that, I actually thought I was not as smart as everybody else. And
Oh,
that
yeah, me too.
Yes, I actually, because I would see these other kids who could memorize the textbook and do homework and take tests without ever having to study, and I struggled with that. I'm like, there is no way I can read this book and, just be able to just do and excel on this tests or do the homework easily, I realized I had to work really hard. I had to go home and I had to study extra hard and I had to process the information. I didn't know this at the time. I had to process the information in a very different way than classic a teacher in front of the room talking to you. And so I actually thought that I wasn't as smart as everybody else. So being a true Asian American who immigrated from China, who at the age of 7, who has parents who, drill into you hard work and success and all these different definitions, I was like, I have to make straight A's. How am I going to do that? I have to work hard. I have to work my butt off to excel in a way that only that I know I can. And I felt like I was an imposter because people would look at me, and there's this thing called the model minority myth, which is
Mhm.
that, as you know, Asians are seen as the model minority because we work hard, we tend to be more intelligent, we excel in all these different areas that contribute to society, and we don't really, ruffle feathers or anything like that. And so I was like, I'm Asian. Everybody's like, "Oh, you're so good at math." And I was very good at math. Math came super easily, but the writing was really hard for me. And, English, of course, it was my second language. Science was really things that were a little bit more complex for my brain to process. Like I was like, oh my gosh, I'm just not as smart as everybody else. So that deficit mindset actually followed me basically my whole life. And so I thought the only way I could accomplish and have achievements and succeed was through my hard work. And I was like, I got that from my parents because that's what Chinese people do. We work hard,
Mhm.
right? And so I thought everybody had to work hard. And I just thought, that's fine. I'm not like gifted and I'm not intelligent like others. I'm just going to work hard for it. And I did. I worked hard. I went above and beyond in everything I did, whether it was school, whether it was work, whether it was relationships, everything. I kind of went above and beyond and thinking that that's what it took. Fast forward to having my child, and I started to see that these actually were really harmful ways of thinking about myself because this deficit mindset drove me to push myself in a way that actually was very harmful for my nervous system. So,
Mm.
neurodivergent individuals tend to have more sensitive nervous systems where you have higher likelihood of having anxiety, depression, a lot of more mental health kind of risks. And that's because, like for ADHD, I learned that there's such a thing called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And RSD is actually what contributes to a lot of us feeling like we need to fit in, that we need to be accepted, that we
Interesting.
need to be liked. And that rejection sensitivity makes us do all these things to feel like we need to belong. And so not only was it my culture and my family and my society that was driving my need to kind of fit in and excel and be popular and all these other things, it was actually my brain. My brain, the ADHD brain is actually a product of it's a survival skill, right? So our ancestors needed that sort of hyper awareness, hyper vigilance, the ability to, kind of notice everything in order to survive. I mean, we're talking about hunter gatherers, right? That benefit from having an ADHD brain. But guess what the difference is from our ancestors to today? We don't need to be in this like hyper vigilant
Right.
ADHD mode when we were hunter gatherers. It was only when
Mhm.
the saber-toothed tiger came out.
Right.
But now we live in a world that is so overstimulating that doesn't feel safe all the time. Like back in the day, we used to get breaks. Nowadays, our brain is constantly engaged, right?
Right.
So our ADHD brain is overstimulated. And this is why you're seeing more people self-identifying or being diagnosed with ADHD. And everybody's like, oh, it's because there's just, we know more about it. Well, no, that's not the only thing. I think our environment is actually exacerbating a lot of these symptoms
Right.
because we are over creating a lot more stimulation than we've ever had to before.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that is, really part of the reason why I chose to focus on the strength-based approach. So that's how I parent my child. I look at him and I look at all the positives because for the first time in, I'm 43, so in 40 plus years, I look at myself very differently. I had to do
Mhm.
a lot of internal work to accept that I actually have all these amazing natural abilities that I thought were deficits. And
Yeah.
it's just that I need a different environment. It's just that I work differently. It's that I think differently. It's that I engage differently. And so when I force myself in a corporate world for 20 years to continue to adapt and to fit in and to, feel like I was same as everybody else, it actually was doing a lot of harm. And
Yeah.
so a year ago, I left the corporate world, and I'm an entrepreneur.
Your story reminds me a lot of how I grew up when I was in school. I very much wanted to fit in, but I didn't know how because I had, certain autistic tendencies that I just didn't understand people's
Yeah,
emotions
the
that
social
well.
Social
Yeah,
pragmatics is a huge area of challenge for neurodivergent individuals. These things don't come naturally to us, right? You see other people engaging and talking naturally and having a conversation. You're like, why can't I do that? Well, it's
right.
because your brain is wired differently. And not to say that there are neurodivergent individuals who, you probably know this about me. I'm very social, but I acquire this as a survival skill. I learned this behavior. I
Right.
learned how to be social. I learned that making eye contact and being able to converse and being able to have the back and forth and being able to learn things about other people helps me kind of adapt
Yeah.
quicker.
No,
And
and
so
I
it's
was
a survival skill. Yeah.
Yeah, I was the same way. Like if you talk about all of the criteria that you listed, it's like I checked so many of these boxes where I wanted to fit in. I was kind of good at sports. I decided that if I was going to get really good at sports, I'd fit in better. So I basically trained myself into being a professional athlete so that I could fit in better, without realizing at the time that an easier way to do it would be just to develop better social skills and pay attention to people's emotions and the emotions they were expressing to me. But over the course of that journey, I realized, well, I'm actually just trying to be successful. And if I want to be successful, I need to be able to interact with other people and be less awkward doing it. So I ended up getting a job at Google doing sales. And I realized that all the other people in the same role that I was in recognize people's emotions better. And so
Yeah.
I was good at talking. I just wasn't good at receiving all of these cues from other people. And when you pair this with the challenges that I had following fictional stories, like I don't follow fictional stories very well. I probably do it, at the 50th percentile, say, for the general population. It was very challenging for me to get, A's in my literature classes because I just didn't care. And I thought it was because I couldn't read. As I've gotten older, I realized, no, this applies to movies too. I don't follow fictional movies very well. And so my parents took me to get to a learning psychologist when I was a senior in high school to try to figure out, like, okay, why is Alex really good at math, but he struggles to read? Like, he's kind of illiterate, but he's going to a top university, and like, we should figure out what's going on. And the learning psychologist said that, my IQ was 145. I had mild ADHD. And like, for all of these reasons, you have extreme strengths paired with weaknesses that you wouldn't expect somebody to have, who had those strengths. And then my entire life, there has been a struggle to, how do I fit in with the normies? At the same time, there was the rejection sensitivity where, as an athlete, I developed much more anxiety than my teammates did. It was very, very stressful, the prospect of failing in front of thousands of people, to the
Yeah.
point where, I've spent 2 decades trying to reset my nervous system. And what you mentioned about our nervous system being trained for a primal environment actually reminds me of a hypnotist that I connected with, Jason Andrews, on Twitter, X now. And, he has a 25, 30-minute script that I'll occasionally listen to before bedtime. And it says exactly that, where, our nervous system and our hypervigilance was created or evolved to exist in a time where we could actually reset and we actually had enemies or
Yeah.
natural predators that we needed to worry about. But now's not that time. And so, perhaps now we can, stop the war that we're waging against the natural world and go for a pause. But like you mentioned, I do think that the world that we're living in will increasingly push us towards not being able to stop, not being able to reset. Because if you think about what's the goal of a marketing campaign, what's the goal of a sales campaign, it's to get your brain thinking about the thing they're trying to sell you. And so with advancements in AI and digital analytics, the content that we're exposed to is going to be that much more moving. It's going to be that much more emotionally captivating. And the people who are sensitive to this are going to be overloaded to the point where, it's possible that we're going to need more time away from screens just to detox our nervous system and like sleep normally and get along with the world.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the sciences that I've gotten into, epigenetics is one that has given me so much insight about what our bodies need, neurodivergent brains and bodies need. Another one is sociogenomics. And so what you just talked about is actually well explained in sociogenomics, because sociogenomics helps us understand that as human beings, we were wired to connect to each other, to human beings, right? Because that sense of community is what protected us from, dangers back in the day. And they also talk about how we used to belong to this tight knit community where we supported each other. It was a very selfless kind of environment where everything we did was to support each other, to ensure everybody's collective survival. What's happened now is it's all very individualistic. We're focusing on individual success. We're focusing on how do I, how do I do better than the other person? And that sort of highly competitive environment is what creates a lot of this sort of overwhelming anxiety, right? Like today, I can log on to social media and I see somebody's post and I'm like, I need to learn this, or why am I not doing this? Why, blah, blah. It's just like constant. So even if you feel like you're not intentionally engaging in something that's meant to overwhelm you, you are, because we now have this nervous system that tells us we need to stay on top of things. We need to do this. We have to do this. Otherwise, you're going to fail. And so that's where what you were saying about the break and stepping away in that reset is absolutely critical for neurodivergent brains. Because if you think about how our brains work, we are taking in far more information than a
Mm.
neurotypical brain. So a neurotypical brain might be able to absorb up some of this information and they may not do anything with it, and that will be good for them. For me, that doesn't work. Any information that I absorb, it's being processed in like hyper mode. And so when
Mm.
you think about that, our brains need a break even more than neurotypical brains. And so you have to be very intentional in making sure that you do step away, that you're creating spaces for yourself where you have the ability to disconnect. And especially from, social media or whatever it is that like kind of activates you, make sure you intentionally step away from that. And so there are a
Yeah.
lot of things that we need to think, not just about our brains, but we need to think about what our bodies need. When you think about nervous system, parasympathetic and sympathetic, and you start to think about what our body needs, we now know that our body holds on to a lot of stress and anxiety. And so this isn't just about like stepping away physically from something. It's also giving our body the nourishment it needs. So my son, um, we take a completely holistic approach to supporting his needs. We realize how complex his brain is. And so why does the complex brain need just one or two solutions? It needs a lot. So the complex individual needs a complex holistic support system. So my son, and our whole body, sorry, our whole family we are very nutrition, conscious.
Mhm.
So we eat very healthy. Like we purify our air, we purify our water. We are trying to constantly be outside. Everything we eat is organic and, without the added preservatives. We avoid added sugars, we avoid food dyes, preservatives, you name it. And that was just the beginning, because that's not enough. And we did genetics testing to try to understand what sort of mutations our bodies had that actually gives us sort of a disadvantage from the get-go, right? You're
Mhm.
predisposed to certain things. This is why family history of illnesses and, whatnot is very important, because that's how you sort of get insights into, well, what am I predisposed to? And the reality is, in order to help ourselves, we need to personalize solutions. Like I'm sure you do this for your clients, right? You're not going and doing it one size fits all for
Right.
everybody. It's like,
I
well, how do
can't.
I? You can't, because that one client is different from another. This is how I approach my work too, is like you have to tailor and personalize, because otherwise these one size fits all solutions don't work. I've tried them for my son. They didn't work. So I just kept pushing and pushing. And so nutrition, we also realized that his body struggles to detox. That's a huge disadvantage. If that's the case, then everything that we put in his body, we need to be extra careful, because something that might not be harmful for somebody who doesn't have the mutations that he has is very harmful for him. He can't get rid of it. And so we all know what happens if you have toxins that just stay in your body. It could actually have neurological impact. And so there are a lot of things that you start to understand about how your body works that impacts your brain, the gut brain axis. We all know that what you eat and what is going on with your gut can actually impact your brain. And so we're seeing a lot of this because that detoxing, a lot of the toxins, they stay in your stomach and it impacts your immune system, impacts everything. So he also is on a lot of supplements to help his body function more optimally. I'm sure, like, as an athlete, you take protein and other powders because the reality is we can't consume all these things. We need help, but you need help through personalized insights, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and take the proteins and all the supplements and, those like multivitamins. What are they supposed to do, right? So we realize the multivitamin doesn't work for our child because he has very targeted needs. And so he's on a lot of supplements, as am I. Because I don't medicate, neither of us are medicated for ADHD. We do all the natural things like the omega-3s and, the P5P and whatever. There's a lot of standard things that you take, but also exercise. So I think you're going to love this piece because his brain, in order for his brain to actually work, he has to physically move. So the physical stuff
Yeah.
is really important because it activates part of his brain that he needs to think.
Mhm. It's really interesting that you mentioned that your brain works better or the neurodivergent brain works better when it's moving, because I was actually speaking to a client yesterday who goes on walking on his under the desk treadmill during calls. And he's very smart, PhD, data science, and works at an insurance group. And the CEO did not like the fact that he was walking during his one-on-one or during his group call with the CEO, to the point where, they banned him from walking during phone calls with C-suite executives and external parties. And, I told him he should get a doctor's note. And, if they say that he can't, just, sue them basically. But, that really highlights your point where this guy has a very high IQ. And his CEO, who almost certainly has a lower IQ than him, is telling him to not do the thing that he needs to do to perform at his peak because it's not fitting in the way that the CEO thinks is professional.
Yeah. And, it's really harmful to work in those environments where your needs aren't being met. And this is part of the reason why I do the work I do, because I lived in that environment where it was clear what's expected of you, right? And so as a neurodivergent individual, you kind of have to accommodate. You have to do whatever it is to force yourself to make it work in that environment. So this individual that you're talking to, your client, movement actually, like I said earlier, activates part of your brain that actually helps with memory. It might help with coordination. It might help with, just like literally conversations. And it might also be calming for his nervous system. And so
Mhm.
he might get stressed or anxious in these calls with these clients, and especially C-suite, right? We all know that that's an intimidating environment to be in. And so when these are safety guards that are taken away from an individual who needs it, this is the type of stuff that leads to burnout. Because if I'm
Mhm.
not able to meet my needs in environments that are highly stressful, that's just going to really strain my nervous system. And the outcome is you hear about it all the time. People burnt out, and there are far more severe, like medical situations and mental health situations that happen. Luckily, I do a lot. I mean, I have therapist, coach, you name it.
Sure.
I have a huge support system. I also do a lot of work around positive intelligence that's completely changed the way I think. It's mental fitness training. Basically, the way you train your body, Alex, is how I train my brain. I work out
Oh,
my
that's
brain.
100% true.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear a greater definition on positive intelligence for our
Yeah.
listening audience. But I
Yeah.
always thought that my work in the gym forced me to push myself through discomfort. And that's exactly how learning happens, because I was actually talking to my friend Alexander Cortez about this, and he's a very intelligent individual as well. And what I told him was that most people don't care about cognitive dissonance. It doesn't make them uncomfortable the way cognitive dissonance makes me uncomfortable. But when cognitive dissonance makes me uncomfortable, I feel the same way, where I'm like one rep away from hitting a PR in the gym or one interval sprint away from hitting a PR on the treadmill. And I push through that discomfort cognitively the same way I push through the discomfort physically, in order to connect new dots and formulate new mental models that can better explain the world and the contradictory information that I'm being presented with that invalidates my previous assumptions.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what makes neurodivergent brains think outside the box, right? Be able to think around things that are uncomfortable for neurotypical brains. Because what happens is the approach is very different. A neurotypical brain encounters something uncomfortable, they're most likely going to avoid, shy away, just not confront it. Whereas for a neurodivergent brain, we figure out ways to push through. And I think, that that obviously takes a lot of effort and energy. And when we're doing that constantly, it can be taxing. And so that's why it's even more important for us to ensure that when there are environments where we don't need to do that, we need to have more of it so that we almost balance out our abilities in a way that we get the break that we need, because we know that's how our brain is wired, that we're constantly pushing a rate that's not sustainable. So, the mental fitness for me, so positive intelligence is actually just, it's an operating system that helps you understand your top saboteurs. And so we all have these self-limiting sort of thoughts in our brain that prevent us from sort of reaching our potential, and that holds us back. All those negative emotions that we're very familiar with, right? Self-doubt, fear, guilt, shame, blame, resentment, you name it. Those are the things that actually hold us back. And when we have experience those negative emotions, what positive intelligence teaches you are the tools and the skills to learn how to address those negative emotions. And the thing I love about positive intelligence is it teaches you that negative emotions are actually not bad. They are just signals, or they should be seen as data, right? Like, I'm not feeling comfortable with this emotion. Why? And what am I going to do about it? Do I stay in this space, which is obviously the harmful decision to make? And a lot of people do. Like, imagine somebody's going through grief. They are so grief stricken. They just stay in that space and they're just grieving and they're feeling like they're a victim. Why is this happening to me? And it just spirals, right? And you can create such a negative experience and environment around that. But then imagine with positive intelligence, you think, this is such a hard thing that happened to me, but I'm not going to let this define, who I am or what I do next. I'm actually going to think about the gift or opportunity that is coming out of this situation, and how am I going to use this to learn from this, or how am I going to use this to move forward or to potentially help other people. And so, this is the difference in having a PQ powered brain, and I think one that isn't, is that you now have these tools. So there are 5 stages that kind of, your wiser self is kind of how it's described, that help get you out of these negative spaces. And so I now have this full operating system that I use on a daily basis. So I use PQ every single day, like sometimes every minute.
What would be an example of the 5 tools that, because I imagine what you're saying, it reminds me a lot of my study of very elite performers, where they're able to take what they're experiencing and then re-narrate it in their brain in a way that allows them to perform at their peak, even if it's disconnected from reality. And so I
Yep.
think a lot of these tools, do some degree of that. But I think for our listening audience, we would love to hear more about those tools.
Yes, it's amazing. So there are basically 5 stages, and it's activate, innovate, explore, navigate, and empathize. So these are 5 that any 5 of these you can use by itself, or you could use a combination thereof. It depends on how negative the situation is and how hard it is for you personally. So I'll use an example to kind of make this easier to understand. When my son was diagnosed as being neurodivergent. And of course, I was seeing the challenges every day, and it was triggering me. It was so hard for him. It was so hard for me. And I would say the first year of navigating it was probably the hardest year of my life, because I didn't know what I was dealing with. I didn't have the schools nor the tools to parent him and support him the way that I knew he needed to. And I myself was struggling because he was triggering and activating sort of deep, right, challenges that I experienced myself. And so seeing all of this was really hard. I mean, every single negative emotion you could probably name, I experienced in that first year. And I just, guilt. Why is, like, did I do something to my child? Shame. Why is my son different? Blame. We did something. It's my fault. And resentment. Why is this happening to me? Victim. Like, why me? I see other parents who have children who are neurotypical, like all these things. And it was really hard. And the more that happened, the harder it got. And positive intelligence, I discovered 3 years ago. So a year after this, I started doing the work. And it really, the core thing is that PQ teaches is shifting your mindset. And so when I realized that these negative emotions were normal and that they're actually like useful, all I needed to do was think differently. So instead of looking at my son and thinking, wow, why did this happen to me? And why is he like, I started to see the gift and opportunity. You know what? Having a child like this enables me to learn about myself so that I can become the person that he needs me to be. Thereby, I'm helping myself, I'm helping my child, and, and all of it, like, empathize. Empathy is a huge one, right? Like, I always had empathy for others, but my son just took it to another level because when you see a child of your own suffering and going through challenges and struggling, I don't think your empathy could get higher to that. But one of the things I didn't have was empathy for myself. And that
Yeah.
was one of the things that really was a game changer for me. I started to show empathy for myself. I started to give myself breaks. I started to tell myself, it's okay. This isn't your fault, but channel your energy on how you move forward. Navigate is, well, how do I navigate this? Like, I don't have any tools. Well, you know what? Go and figure out what sort of support system you might need. Activate is one that I still use every day. It's actually on a sticky note. I'm looking at it right now to remind myself. Because I have ADHD and I'm an entrepreneur, I get overwhelmed very often with all the things that I have to do. And I'm also a full-time parent to two boys. And I also run a nonprofit supporting people in my community who have neurodivergent children. And so I get overwhelmed easily. And I constantly have to ground myself and think, Yush, what is needed right now? And that's activate. Activate just gets me to hyper focus on the very next step. I hyper focus on that step and I do it, and then I move on to the next. And I might get overwhelmed again, but I can continue to adopt this approach. And innovate. Innovate is obviously like, how do I think differently about this? Like, most traditional parents, neurodivergent children might do X, but how do I think differently about doing this in a different way? Why should I do it the way that everybody else is telling me to? So innovate, that's how I apply it to my children. And explore. You know what? I don't have all the answers. Explore is what makes you curious. I'm just going to try this out because I will be honest, in the past 4 years, there has been so much trial and error. There's no handbook, right? And because my child is unique and different from the next neurodivergent child, there's nothing and plus I read everything. Talk to so many parents, but I have to figure out what is uniquely going to work for him. And so I have to try a lot of different things. And so explore enables me to try it without feeling the fear of failure. Because the reality is, a lot of us are held back from doing things because we're scared of failing. And so with my son, I know I don't have a guidebook. I don't know the answers, but I just trust myself and I continue to push myself and I explore and I try new things. And happy to say 4 years on and we're in a great place. He's thriving, he's flourishing because of all these things that I've tried and tested. And yes, the first few things usually don't work, but then I do always find something that does work. And so that's why PQ has been so powerful for me because especially people who are neurodivergent, I think we get stuck in our own headspace
Yeah.
around that deficit mindset, right? Around thinking certain things because society makes us feel this way about us because we're different ourselves. And so I think we absolutely need these tools more than anybody else. And so I actually use PQ in all of my work. And this is why I primarily focus on supporting neurodivergent individuals because we need the help the most.
Yeah.
And neurodivergent individuals have the greatest potential. So we're talking about change makers, right? Who just need to know that they have it within themselves. And these
Right.
are PQ. I think has all the tools. The beauty of a lot of it is it's science driven. There's neuroscience behind it that explains the neuroplasticity of our brains. That we are wired to continue to learn and grow and rewire our brain. So I just think about the great potential that neurodivergent individuals hold, and I'm like, I want to help unlock that potential. And I think PQ is such a great way to understand it, like from a logical and analytical perspective, because that's how a lot of neurodivergent brains are wired, and then be able to make sense of sort of the emotional and kind of all the feelings behind
It
what's happening.
it it's almost like, if you're neurodivergent or if your child's neurodivergent, you've been gifted a Ferrari that doesn't have an owner's manual,
Yes,
and if you try to drive it like a Toyota, you're gonna be very frustrated because it's not a Toyota and it's never gonna perform like a Toyota, but it can do things that Toyotas can't. And,
right.
and it's your job, what you're effectively doing is you're piecing together a new owner's manual
Yeah.
for the Ferrari that you have. And if you look at a lot of the top performing people, these are not Toyotas. These are Ferraris that have figured out how to adapt to a world that wasn't designed for them. And I think that's incredible what you're doing. So, for our listening audience who is interested in learning more, perhaps for themselves, perhaps for their partner, perhaps for their children, how can they learn more about you? How can they learn more about what you're doing? How can they get more immersed into this world that you left the corporate world for?
Yes, and thank you for that. And I love that Ferrari analogy, by the way. I might start using it. So, yes, so I just soft launched a company called NeuroSpark Plus, and NeuroSpark Plus primarily focuses on two audiences. It's working moms of neurodivergent children because I apply my lived experience to helping other people. I think that's one of my greatest assets. Yes, there's a lot of science behind it, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of strategies, but I think my heart is what makes it the differentiator. Having lived this experience, I can think about pretty much so many different ways, scenarios where I can apply my experience. The other group is obviously organizations, corporate organizations especially, that are interested in building more neuro-inclusive workplaces to support those neurodivergent individuals. Because I think about how can I make an impact at scale? And this is how I can do it through organizations where they are helping, obviously, hundreds and tens of thousands of people at a time by being able to think about how we support neurodivergent strengths. And the reality is, neurodivergent talent is, to me, feels like an untapped talent. A lot of organizations don't recognize that these are the individuals who are driving productivity, who's driving innovation, who are high performers. And so, how do we support and harness that talent? And so, I do one-on-one coaching for moms, but I also support anybody who is neurodivergent. And this is obviously, my practice is very inclusive, but I want to be very specific about a particular audience that I think I can make the biggest impact in. All this work. And so my NeuroSpark Plus, and Plus is spelled out, com, is my website that's launching in the next week or two. I will have a resources hub where I believe in sharing this work and my knowledge and life lessons with everybody. So there will be a lot of free resources available to everybody. I also run a nonprofit in town just for my local community that, I really believe in the value of that in-person connection and that community support. Neurodivergent individuals, you are not alone, but you also don't have to navigate this by yourself. I don't think any of us were meant to. And I truly believe that neurodivergent individuals, we hold our ancestors' sort of superpowers, more than, and retained it more than neurotypical individuals who have evolved maybe a little bit more. But these are superpowers that we have, and I think the world deserves to be able to benefit from it. And the other piece I would say is, neurodivergency to me is just, the way our brains are wired differently. I think that giftedness is actually the root of why our brains are wired differently. And so all these diagnoses that you and I talked about, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, they're just secondary. They are
Mm.
actually, me, almost like a symptom or a side effect of the giftedness, the ability for the brain to operate at such a high level. You have to think that, well, something is going to kind of get lagged behind. So that's kind of what's happening. And so I think when we, as neurodivergent individuals, see ourselves differently and in that light, to me, it's a game changer, right? Because if you believe in yourself, then other people will start to believe in you. And that self-awareness is really critical in this journey. And, my mission is to change the way that neurodivergent individuals are not only seen, but valued and celebrated. And so for that to happen, we need everybody to understand how our brains and how much of a gift that is to the world.
Well, you're doing God's work, Yush. So, appreciate you coming on. And to our listening audience, thank you very much for joining. Hope you like and subscribe. If you want more content like this, comment below and check Yush's work out. You will not regret it.